So how did I wind up on your screen chatting about profitable boutique fitness studios? Because I built 6 of them over 11 years, 4 states, 12,000 plus members, and tens of millions of dollars in revenue, all in a 5-hour work week with a 7-figure-a-year salary. And y'all, I managed to sell all of this in the mid 7 figures just a few years ago.
Thanks for doing this, Lisa. Really appreciate it.
Oh my God, I'm thrilled to be here.
How's it been for you since the morning? You've been here from 8, 9?
So this is actually the end of about 5 weeks of travel.
Nice.
So I arrived in London 5 weeks ago and then wound up meandering all around to Spain, to Morocco, to Italy. Now I'm back, and this was like the culmination of my 5 weeks, and it's just so refreshing to be in a room with everybody. It's so refreshing to be in a room with everyone, literally, and then to be, talking and looking at the future of UK fitness. This is a passion for me. I went to school here in London, so this is it's one of these markets I love and just get thrilled with.
And what's that makes London, what's that make London so different from the US market? I've seen the US market very, very different from the British market.
It's radically different. First of all, I think, if we were looking at where opportunity lies, it lies here right now. And it lies worldwide. It's not that the US is a closed off market. It's not that there's no more opportunity. There is, but here the opportunity is massive. We're just seeing such a small percentage of people that are involved. And I focus on boutique fitness. That's really where my background, where my own businesses lie. And when I see what is happening, 90% of the people we work with in the UK right now are operating on wait lists.
Okay.
I mean, it's because there is literally such a demand. And I find that the market here is less fitness and more wellness driven. In fact, I find it interesting that we continue to call this like the leisure industry and
Right.
where this is, because it's the wellness industry. Clients here have already adapted to that. That's been a long term, and I think that's a massive difference between the UK and the US. Beyond that, I think that things tend to be much more personalized and much more intimate here.
Right.
But London is a place in particular, the UK, I'm speaking I suppose to the UK in whole, London is a place where luxury can really be redefined. I mean, it's a melting pot of so many different cultures that are drawing in together. And yet we can build things like third space,
Right.
build things like where we're really able to say, this is what the future of the luxury market looks like, and this is where we can grow and go to.
Yeah, I think there are some cities in the UK where you can do that. You can't do it everywhere, but you definitely can do it in London, and you can do it in city centre and probably Manchester, Birmingham.
Yes.
You can have one centre each if you want to look
Yeah.
at luxury. So
Yeah.
when you say you're in the boutique space, what's your... So, two things. One, what made you get into the boutique space? So if you were to look at the entire landscape of fitness, you've got the budget gyms and say, if you look at US chains, they're predominantly franchise based.
Yes.
Right? So you look at Anytime Fitness or you look at Orange
Yes.
Theory. So I would say Orange Theory is more boutique, at least that's
Totally.
what, So
Absolutely.
if that's the space that they require, again, they're extremely expensive compared to, some of the other boutiques that you will look at least in this market.
Yeah.
They're still outpriced, I would say, to
Yes.
an extent. So while it's a different market, how do you compete in a market where it's underpenetrated? If you would compare yourself to the US market, which I think most trends across the world start from the US.
Yeah.
And I think you'll have to give it to the Americans for, being able to build brands. They can build brands out of thin air.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing, and they could build a brand and then they could franchise it. I was speaking with one of my friends and said, why don't we as Brits, in this country, why do you not franchise? And they said, franchising is typically an American concept for a simple reason that America is such a large country, right?
Yeah.
That and again you've got state governments and you've got two sets of governments who run. Every state is different, people are different, mindsets are different, and to expand and go into a different territory is going to be difficult for a single entity or a company to do, and to do justice to that.
Yeah,
So they started with the franchising, the master franchising. Not too many British brands have been able to do this very successfully. Now, you are an American,
I am.
and you're a founder of a fitness, a boutique brand.
Yes.
How's been your journey in terms of looking at the two different cultures, adapting to it, looking at people from different places, you got employees from different, how do you work around that?
So it's interesting. So we work in 42 countries at this
Right.
point. So I mean, it's unique that we truly are, when we say we're a global brand, I mean, that's been our focus from day one, because I do think while a lot of trends oftentimes start in the United States, a lot of best practices come globally. I mean, they're things that we pull from all over the world, and I think having that expansion, that ability to see everywhere, that's massive. I mean, that's one of our biggest strengths that we have. You know, when I look at boutique fitness and I say, where are we going, what's coming, all of those things, and I look at the differences between the two cultures, probably the biggest differences that we are seeing is that people tend to underprice here in the UK. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that I would love to see rectified.
But why do you think that happens?
Oh, I think it's nervousness. So it's an interesting, it all starts with a question of, am I worth this? I mean, and that's something that every entrepreneur runs through. It doesn't matter what business you're in, but is this, am I truly worth what we're asking for? So the underpricing, and I'm going to take that a step further, that there's really pricing structures, pricing systems, the theory of pricing, when you look at behavioral economics, which is, a powerful form of, it's literally the economics of pricing and how someone buys. We haven't necessarily carried that into many countries other than the United States. One of the key tenets of this would be, do you have recurring revenue? Are we building a membership base? Are we looking at building something that's going to carry us through from month to month? Or are we reliant on class passes and drop-ins or casual sessions or things of the like? That's where it kind of starts, is at the model itself. That's been missing here. And to be frank, it's missing in many parts of the world. And that makes it a much less sustainable model. And it makes it a model that, speaking to your point about franchising earlier, that's harder to scale because you don't have the revenue that's readily able to drive it. I think franchising in the US is a readily accepted model. I mean, I think that's something that people are very accustomed to. The U.S., though, has done an interesting job, and we'll look at Anytime Fitness and SEB, its parent company as a great example of this. The way that they've reached out to master franchisors, whether you're starting in Australia, whether you're looking at Japan or CrossFit Inspire brands across Asia, whether you're looking here in the UK, they've gone to people who are actually local to these markets and said, hey, let's make this fantastic. That's who is really driving some of the growth and doing it. It was a brilliant strategy on their part, which is proof that, hey, that can work here in the UK. The question is do we have the models that are driving the initial growth that gives you the capital to do that readily? And do you have the investments from private equity that are going to take you there? Because most of our franchise launches in the US are private equity driven.
Yeah, I mean, a very interesting point. Two things that you raised. One was about sustainability, and I'll get to that, the sustainability of the revenue. And the second is about the localization, getting the right partners in. So one of my friend runs Anytime Fitness in India. He's got 124. So Vikas Jain is his name, and he's got 124 studios. And the reason he's been able to do well is because he understands that market so well. He was in the fitness industry even before starting Anytime Fitness. And his ability to understand the Indian market and the cultural differences within the country is unbelievable. And unless you get that right, I think this is where a lot of people go wrong. They want to do everything on their own.
Doesn't work.
And it doesn't work. Right. Coming back to the second point that you spoke about, sustainability. Now, especially for boutiques, this is something that a lot of people I think a lot of our listeners would want to understand from you. How do you make a sustainable model for a boutique gym? You made that point about class pass and people walking in one off, one in.
Yeah.
That's not a sustainable model.
It's not.
How do you build engagement, community? How do you make sure that people are stuck onto you, stay on with you? I think what we talk about, the LTV of a customer, lifetime value of a customer. How do you make sure, and especially as a boutique, it's very difficult. A lot of times boutiques, at least in the UK, you would see, are viewed as one-man show doing something great and can't be replicated and can't be scaled.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. The one-man shop is look, that's probably where most people get stuck. And that is that you have bought yourself a job, not necessarily a business. And I think that's such a crucial difference to explain to everybody on this one. So first of all, if I take it back a step, this all starts with the model. And we're seeing the rise of so many different kinds. So obviously you have unique single modality models. That's like you have a bar studio, you have a Pilates studio, you have a cycling studio. Maybe you go one step further and you say, I'm not just group fitness, which is what we've historically thought of as boutique fitness, but I'm going to offer one-on-one, I'm going to offer small group training, I'm going to offer some differentials. What I see as one of the larger scale sectors, it was interesting, I was just talking to a woman, she's one of the first people I've heard in the UK really discussing this on this, is the rise of the wellness center model, where we've got multiple modalities under one roof. It's very much longevity focused, we're very much focused on what is going to be the long-term health ramifications. We might be bringing functional medicine, we might be bringing things like drip bars or IV bars that are coming into there. We may be bringing physiotherapy. We may be drinking energy, having energy like Reiki and massage and energy practices. That are
biohacking is big now.
It's massive. And so when you start to think of the fact that someone can come to you truly for, instead of coming to you for cycling, they're coming to you for a healthier body, a healthier mind. That's what I think that we're having to grow towards in our industry. And that's, by the way, it's not just boutique fitness. I mean, quite frankly, I think when I look at the large-scale sectors of health clubs and things like that, I think that's a question they've got to be asking themselves is how are we a place where someone is truly going to get to the best version of themselves? We can look at an obesity epidemic in children. We can look at vice versa at people who are living longer, but I would argue are not living better on where this is. We've got to do something on where this is. And we can be at the forefront. We are preventative medicine. 100%. That is not a question. That is something that is wildly proven. And if we can start to step into that in the models that we have, we're going to see radical change. So how do people build, though, community? How do they do this? Look, it starts, first of all, with an amazing team. There's no question on this one. We talk about where do you go from a one-man shop? It's the first person you hire takes you to a business. It takes you to a team. It takes you to where you're going. For me personally, that's a selection process. So oftentimes people like my hiring process. My husband was in the special operations community. I remember we were working with dear friends. This is probably 4 or 5 years into having our studios, and he looked at me and he said, your hiring process, it's But he said, your selection process, let's rewrite this. Like, how are you selected to be a Navy SEAL? How are you selected for the SAS? That is a totally different mindset that you go into when you start to look. And so I think foundationally, this is going to be who are you bringing on and what is the organizational chart going to look like? Because we oftentimes think of the owner-operator and we get stuck there.
100%.
To be quite frank, if you're going to scale, you're pretty soon going to be the owner and not the operator. Okay. And I think that means that we've got to start thinking, what is your management structure going to look like? What is it going to look like at one studio? What is it going to look like at 3 studios, at 5 studios, at 10 studios, at 20 studios? All of which, when I look at my clients in the UK, it's funny, on average, they're averaging 3 studios each because they're growing so fast because the market, it's hungry for what they do.
Yes.
It's amazing. And so I think that's the first piece of it. I'm not going to lie, the biggest issue that we see in the UK, and I realize I say this as an American, but I say this as an American who's lived here, who understands this culture. You have to be able to sell to someone. And I'm not talking about like this intense, nasty sales process. I mean, you need to be able to look at someone and say, okay, this is what you actually need. Yeah. This is what you desire. Yeah. This is going to be your path to go there. Here's how we can help you along this. It's education at its finest. And that's what this industry does well, but It's something we have completely ignored. I talk to people all the time and they're like, I hate that part of it. And I'm like, we got to flip the script on this.
I love that part of it. And I'll tell you, what you've touched upon is a challenge that the UK has been having for a very long time, which is not being able to sell. I don't know why it's derogatory to say, okay, you're trying to oversell or do. The thing is, if you know your product well, right? So I think the product knowledge itself is a challenge for a lot of people. If you get people in on board who don't understand the product well, you're not able to sell. And what you're trying to do is, you always have to look at a customer, and you said, we are actually helping people. At the end of the day,
easy.
So as part of World Active, I'm part of the World Active, and one of the agendas is that we need to get more people on the fitness bandwagon. So more people, more active, more often. Now, how do you do that if you don't get people on this? I always say, as a gym operator, I'm happy for me to lose my member to another fitness change, but not somebody who falls off the rails of the entire fitness programming, or just stops working out. The more people we have, for what it does for you as a fitness, if only 15% of the UK is going to the gym, there is something grossly wrong. You need to change
radical.
that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is we have all these conversations on retention. I mean, I had facilities. My facilities had a 73% retention rate, 13-month rolling.
Wow.
Which is kind of unheard of.
Yeah.
But it started with our sales process because we got people to really buy into themselves. When you're selling to somebody, and I'll call it an educated sales process because that's really what it should be. The first person that has to buy that, they have to buy that they are worth it.
Yeah.
They have to buy that they are going to commit to this. They have to buy that this is what their body needs. You are secondary to the process. You are really selling to them, is this going to be what's going to change your life?
Yeah.
Is this where this is? And that's where retention starts, because when someone comes in with an educated prospect and they're like, I do need to come to the studio, I do need to come to the gym 4 times a week, I need to be there 3 times a week, I need to be doing these types of things. You've educated them properly on how to utilize your facility from the beginning. That's part of the process. It's the integral part of the process. It's the knowledge part that you just spoke of on this. That's how you retain people. I mean, it starts there.
Right.
We can talk about all the other things about non-usage and making sure you're doing this, but if you don't have it at the very beginning, when we know that's like the critical first 6 weeks of ensuring, I believe your lifetime value, it's measured in the first 6 weeks someone's in your facility.
Yep.
You can look at how they're utilizing it, what they're doing, and we've been tracking those stats for longer than I want to admit. but that's really what you're coming out on. And by the way, that's something that we've seen to some degree in the health club industry. I look at boutique fitness. We treat these as 2 separate industries. They are one in the same industry. We are two flip the coin on 2 sides of the same coin on where this is. But when I look at where we're coming from there, this is something that boutique fitness across the board, we can't be afraid of the data. We can't be afraid of the client journey. That's something that I think across the board, it's just rotten. In so many places, and that's worldwide. It's one of the first things we work on with people. Everyone always wants to know, why has Starbucks been so successful? Oh, they've got a fabulous client journey. I mean, their app is just one aspect of it, but they ensure where that goes. If we take like a page from their book, are we doing anything that's really encouraging somebody from the moment that they walk in to continue to come, to engage, to be a part of the community? Have we built a journey that's going to guide them from step to step to step? That's more of the hospitality industry, and yet I would argue that fitness is where hospitality, service, and medicine meet. That's where we're living right now.
I always say this. See, we are in the service industry. We happen to be in fitness. The service aspect is extremely important because we're doing multiple things. We're trying to educate people. A lot of people, there are a lot of myths around. So like in India, one of the challenges we used to face was typically gyms are, looked at as bodybuilding.
Totally.
So people think, okay, so steroids, all kinds of supplements, and you tell them, what, fitness is so good for you. And there was a recent research done in Australia where it said that physical exercise is 1.5 times better than any kind of counseling, clinical psychology counseling, or antidepressants. It's so good for you. And still, you got 15% of the UK which is bought into this. And mind you, our average age in the UK is 41, which means a lot more should be hitting the gym. And it's not good for them. So keep the industry and the commercial side out of it. It's actually bad for the nation, because this reflects on my NHS bill. Right? If you're not well, you go more to the doctors, to the hospital. Your work,
the
productivity
pressure on
goes
the
down.
NHS.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's interesting. So we went on Monday. We do a lot of advocacy work in the US, and it's something we want to expand to here in the UK. So I timed over to go listen to some debates in Parliament in regards to some driving forces in primary care right now. Y'all, the system's a mess. I mean, and it's not being helped by the fact that we've got a population from youth to geriatric
Yeah,
that is unhealthy
absolutely.
at its core. You know, you spoke on the mental health piece of this. My mother's a psychotherapist. The first thing she does with every client is she makes them chart their steps. And she gives them a requirement on this, that this is like, if you're going to work with her, you are going to walk, you are going to move. I mean, these are basic
Yep.
principles that we've gotten away from. And if we want to look at the crisis of health that's going on, I believe it starts with us.
Studio Grow, the largest boutique fitness consultancy group in the world. I realized the boutique fitness industry was broken and that I might just have a solution to fix it.
Absolutely, spot on,
Yeah.
100%. Completely agree with you. So, tell me, more about you as an entrepreneur, right? Let's go back to when you started, and how did all this happen? When did you think that I'm going to do this?
Well, so I mean, if I'm being totally realistic, and I'm giving credit where credit is due,
Yeah.
I am the child of two entrepreneurs. And
Oh, wow.
I say that very importantly because I grew up in my family's businesses. I grew up in my grandfather's business. I grew up in my mother's businesses. I grew up, watching my father start companies. I grew up in an environment that really, I think, embraced and facilitated the ability for my growth as an entrepreneur. In fact, while we were sitting down, my son was coming over. My 15-year-old is here with me because I want him to understand from a young age that this is something he is a part of, and to grasp where that culture is. So, my journey started really young. I worked in my family's companies. I did that, from the time I was 13 all the way through college. And then I moved off to Boston, planning on going to college and for graduate school. And I was young, like 20 years old. And I decided to defer my degree for a year and wound up starting my very first company then. It was in the tech space. We built the front end of mass.gov, which at the time was this, essentially $100 million web portal, the most expensive in the world. And I looked at everything and thought, am I going back to school? No. Much to my father's horror on where this is. So I wound up starting that space, and never in my million years thought I would wind up in fitness. I love this. I was an athlete. I was a dancer. I loved to work out, but I did it for pleasure. I did it for me. And when I was exiting my very first company, I went back to New Orleans, Louisiana. It's where I'm from, in the States. And I walked into a Pilates class, and it literally rocked my world. From there, we had all of these other things. I actually had several other companies that we developed, we sold in between there. But within about 4 years, we started our studios all across the U.S. We started inside of Intel Corporation and had studios there focused on yoga, CrossFit, and Pilates, because that's a combination that everyone assumes is incredibly great. It was kind of wild, but it worked. And then opened brick and mortar studios all over the U.S. And we started Studio Grow because we had so many people who were coming through our studios and saying, what are you doing differently? You're running 35, 36, 37% profit margins. You're working less every year, and with every studio you open, what gives on this one? And I thought this would be this little project. It was going to be my little side project. And about 6 months after we started it, we got unsolicited offers on all of our studios, and in 4 months sold everything. It was unbelievable. It's the mid to upper seven figures that we were able to exit with those.
Nice.
And Studio Grow has just expanded. We're now to a team of 45. We just hired our 45th employee.
45 full-time
45 team members.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty crazy, and 42 countries. And this was born out of just, we looked at the industry, and in my mind, we were seeing studios failing everywhere.
And this is the question I wanted to come to. How does an entrepreneur look at a market where you see so many people failing and failing miserably and say, you know what, I'm going to do this?
Well, it's because it was my first year in the market. So look, I had incredibly successful companies.
Right.
I opened my first year inside of Intel Corporation, and I went with the quote-unquote model that everyone was like, oh, this is the tried and true model, go for this. And I got to the end of my first year and I'd made no money. Like I'd made lots of money, but no profit.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought, well, shit, if this is me and I know how to have a successful business and I've got great projections and I've got great numbers and I've got great operations, how is anyone else going to do this? And so it was this very real moment of, hey, the industry has really been set up to fail. It wasn't the individuals within this. The models that were structured, they were never sustainable.
Correct.
You know, and we've continued to see this. I see oftentimes people they're basing themselves off of models that are either VC or private equity backed. These are models that are meant to scale quickly, they're meant to grow, they're meant to not necessarily be profitable. They're gaining a market share, and they try to equate that towards, I'm going to start this on my own and I'm going to follow that same model. That doesn't work.
Can't work.
It can't work. And so, you know, that's where it started, it was plain and simple. I knew what it was like. And I mean, when we started like rewriting our models, I mean, this is probably 2007, 2008, you know, time period, I looked around and thought, we're going to do things radically different. And quite frankly, everyone told me we would fail when we were doing it because it was different and it worked beautifully.
So what do you think, if you were to, you know, pinpoint and say, this is what I attribute my success to in terms of being able to remodel the entire fitness industry? Because, you know, like you said, we've all seen this. We've seen so many great, amazing concepts just fail.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would say is the pricing models across the board are radically off. If you have the incorrect pricing model, it impacts your business model infrastructure on where this is. It's going to impact your profitability. It's going to impact your marketing and whether or not people will actually buy from the front end. It's going to impact your sales and whether people are going to buy from the back end. So the first thing we saw is that the pricing model needed to be shaken. And I was lucky because my dad had been part of a group of guys. They would take over oil and gas services companies. And guess what he did? He repackaged all their products and repriced them and helped really shape what that looked like. And so I'd been talking behavioral economics at the kitchen table since I was like tiny, like way tinier than my parents probably should have. But we started with like really reframing and saying, okay, what does pricing need to be? What do we really need to structure? And you know, pricing, how do we get our services onto recurring revenue? What other services need to be added into this? How can we look at ancillary models and products that we need to take? What does a product stack need to be driven? And how do we structure that in? It all comes down to the model itself, but you know, that's where I think where we start and where we continue to start with clients. I mean, we work with clients from, you know, massive billion-dollar brands to people who are starting their very first studio, to, you know, in-home studios in little towns. We run the gamut of that, and that's where we always start is, do we have this correct? So once we have that correct, I can make everything else work, but if that's not working, nothing else is going to work.
So would you say your secret sauce is the entire value proposition that you give to your customers? Is that one of them, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, I'm a really big believer in being able... I believe that our team is able to see what people's value is radically and share it, and oftentimes in a way they cannot. You know, when you're in the weeds on this one, you know, determining your unique value, you know, what you're really here for, that is so difficult. It's difficult to write
Correct.
your own story.
Correct.
I mean, there's a reason why other people so oftentimes step in as ghostwriters on this. And I think that's something we bring to the table is an ability to see this, but also an ability for our clients to really point out the things that you can't see when you're in the weeds. You know, there are oftentimes such small changes that need to be made that we can look at and say, either we don't see it at all because we're stuck in the day-to-day, or we're looking at so many other things, or we're scared to make them because we're just not sure. You know, there's benefits to us looking inside of, you know, thousands of studios every year. I get to look at their P&Ls. I get to see what their pricing changes are. I get to look at their marketing structures, and I get to help create them. And that gives us insight that, quite frankly, very few people have.
So tell me something. How many studios do you have overall at the moment across
That
the
we're
world?
working with. Right now, so we work with probably every year 1,200 plus individual studios. So that's probably, you know, in the individual studio owners, that's probably 3,500 plus studios worldwide.
Wow.
So it's not a small number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a gold mine of information.
We do, and it's only growing. I mean, because not only do we work with studios that are individual, 20% of our business are franchises,
Right.
or franchisees of major franchises. So we get a chance to look at this and from a franchise perspective, provide some pretty valuable input back
It is.
to say, hey, this is what's working, this is what isn't working.
Yeah, a lot of times we don't know what will work and what will not work, and you don't have enough data. So, to come to a point about price point, one of the things that if I were to look at entrepreneurs, they would want to ask this question to you. So say I have a single studio in some place in the UK,
Yeah.
say, and the reason I've driven my price down is because my competition around me. So, the price point in the UK for budget gyms and then boutiques. The moment you start going north of 50 or 60 pounds, for boutique as well, I'm saying, and I'm not saying
It's across
I'm
the
saying-
board.
Yeah,
It's across the board.
How do you convince somebody to say, you know what, everybody else is 50, you be 100? How do you tell them that? And what do they need to do to do
Well,
it?
the first thing is if you don't have a sales process, that's not going to happen.
Mm.
So I want to say this. We're going to hit a barrier in every market where it's going to take an individual person to step in and actually be able to sell. And I think that's a key thing to understand. We see this all the time. So yes, in the UK, 40 to 50 pounds on this one. At that point, once you get over that, you're going to have a conversation with someone. And quite frankly, when I look at our studio, if I'm looking at a studio, a Pilates studio today, or a bar, or a cycling studio, and I look at their client, the selling proposition is we can change your life. Here's
Correct.
how. It's
Correct.
very simple. This is not like a complex thing, but it has to be delivered uniquely to every person that's in front of you. It doesn't have to take a long period of time. This is a 5-minute to 15-minute conversation if I'm talking about a private package, a more expensive package. But once you learn to have that conversation and, quite frankly, to ask for the sale, that is going to
Closure.
be what... I mean, y'all, this is simple. Are you ready to do this? Yes or no? And it's okay if they say no.
Yeah.
But I think you're doing them a disservice not to ask.
100%.
I mean, they're in front of you seeking help.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I completely, agree with you. And this is something I always tell people, not to shy away from the fact you're technically helping people in having a better and
That's it.
happier life. You made a very, very important point, saying people are living longer, but are they living better?
Yeah.
And you're actually helping people live better with all these things around.
I feel like that we sit in one of the most noble industries. We don't often look at this. I have a philosophy degree. I'm going to say that in advance on where this is. So, this moment of like crisis of thought. What is noble? What is this? We're in a noble industry.
100%.
And we oftentimes write this off as being like, oh God, it's, we're working out or we're doing this. And we lower what we do. I think we do that as an industry. Y'all, it can't be that way.
Yeah, we undermine ourselves.
We have to own what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like I said, World Actor, one of the things that we're saying, we are talking to the WHO to say, we are preventive healthcare. And we are,
Absolutely.
in all, if you look at our industry, dissect it completely as to what we are doing, we are technically preventive healthcare.
It's
And
where we
nobody
start.
can debate that.
No.
Nobody can debate that.
No,
Now,
it's clear. Yeah.
with that being said, the other end of the entire spectrum is are people which like you said, I'm just working out, I'm just doing this, and they don't understand the value they're adding in people. When you see somebody who's lost, say, 25 kilograms, had their, and the body composition has changed, they're living a
Exactly.
better life, you should see the gratitude they have towards you. They feel that they've just won they just feel at the top of the world, and they feel that the gym has done so much for me, the boutique has done so much for me, and that's where the communities get built. But I think we as an industry shy away from leveraging on that and saying, what, we are actually creating an impact in the community. We want more people to be a part of this. And in all honesty, I've run a gym chain in the past, and I used to always tell my people, guys, you are actually helping them live a better life.
So simple.
And they don't, and the day you actually believe in that, the problem is, a lot of people from our industry don't even believe that.
No, I mean, so I think two things. I can remember the very first person who came to us. He'd been working with us for about 7 months. He was Cajun. He was from South Louisiana. You could barely understand him. I could because I'm from there. But he had been displaced across the U.S. and wound up at one of our facilities. And in that 7-month period, he lost a significant amount of weight. He'd had several prior heart attacks, and he had a heart attack 7 months in. And he came back to us because he survived and had an incredible recovery from this. And he said, my doctor told me, had I not spent the last 7 months with you, I would be dead right now. Now, I get chills like years later with that story of a man who is still alive with great grandchildren and living one heck of a life on where this is. When I look at that and I say, okay, this is what we're doing, God, that makes life really easy. But the second, and I'll share this, but I told this to someone in the U.S. They're working on this now in the U.S., but I would love to see this be more of a viral thing. You know, when you look at, for instance, World War II veterans, we capture their stories.
Yeah.
We tell them, we mark them on giant maps and tell all these incredible things of, you know, my grandfather did this, my father did this, all of this. I would love to see us telling the stories of people whose lives have had radical change.
This is a very good idea.
It is a very good idea.
It's a very good idea. It's not patented, is it?
No, I'm telling you, somebody in the UK needs to do this. I told this to a friend in the US, and I'm like, this is a brilliant idea of mine. I cannot do this, but someone needs to take this, because quite frankly, if you look at a map and you see an interactive map of just pinging thousands of stories of like, I got off my antidepressants, I got out of bed, this saved my life, this saved my child's life. This is what we need to be telling. And quite frankly, this is what the public needs to be here as well, because, you know, what we portray internally, which is like, you work out with us, it's this, that, or the other thing. We need to be saying to the public, we are at the forefront of medicine. And by the way, that does change everyone's thoughts.
Correct.
I think they'll take our industry, not only will we take our industry more seriously, so will everyone else on where this is.
It's perspective. It's absolutely.
It's a perspective, and you know, it's a rebrand for the industry, and it needs to be something that we're hearing and we're seeing. The stories are too valuable to miss out on.
No, I completely agree. And we're touching everybody's lives. We are part of, you know, I used to always say, we all go to school. You know, it's assumed that when you're born, you go to a particular age, you'll start going to school.
Yeah.
Why can't that be true for going to workout? Because it's part of, you eat, right? Nobody has to tell you to eat every day. Why can't you?
So, I mean, it's funny. On this trip, so I've been traveling all over. I happened to wind up in like 3 different ancient Roman towns. When you go into an ancient Roman town, it's very regimented. They were very practical. So you had like your main highway, you had your intersecting, and always near that center intersection where the center would be, what do you see? You see their gymnasium.
Correct.
You see their spa complex.
Yeah.
You see all of the thermal baths that they're going to go to. Wellness was at the center, literally. If
So
you
many
look
years
at a
back.
map, 2,000 years ago was
Exactly.
at the center. Why can we not look at this today? And I think this does, you know, it comes down to the priority we put on saying this is an integral part of what we do. This is a necessity. And I think it also comes down to the idea that really getting people to understand, if you want to live a well life, you know, a healthy life, a joyful life, you're going to move.
No, absolutely. Let me ask you something,
Sure.
you know, out of context of fitness per se. As an entrepreneur, tell me what's been your lowest point and how did you handle that? Your biggest failure, and how did you handle that? Because that's something, you know, a lot of people, there's a fear of failure for anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur.
No. So we call it crash and burns. That's what I crash and learn, I should say. Crash and learn. So it's interesting. I'll start this by saying I had a really good example. My dad had a major failure in his business when I was a young child. It was in the late 1980s, and he had a business that because of a tax-related issue, really wound up with a huge tax bill. They had done everything that they felt was appropriate, looked very appropriate. There was some change in taxes, and got a multi-million-dollar tax bill, and wound up with a business that was shut down. And as a child, I watched my father deal with a massive failure. What most people would have said would have stopped you in your tracks, and you would have never moved onward. I watched him within 2 years completely rebuild everything on that one, and that has given me more perspective. My lowest of low moment, I'm not going to lie. You know, for me, like most people, it was in COVID. I can tell you I had plenty of other moments before then that I thought were pretty bad. But, you know, we serve an industry that was shut down worldwide. We had our biggest quarter of the year in the first quarter of 2020. We were sailing to massive heights. We were getting ready to do this, and we were, preparing a business that was, literally doubling and tripling every year. And, we, quite frankly, tabled every product that we had because we needed to just help. It was some of the hardest decisions. It was some of the darkest moments. If you talk to one of our friends who owns a software company, I called him and very honestly said, I think I need to be done, in the midst of this. And did we make some good decisions during it? Yeah, I think we did. Did we have some mass failures during it? Yeah, I think we did too. And I think a lot of those failures, if I'm being direct, is the fact that we allowed a team that was precious to really get burned out. And so we saw turnover we'd never seen. That to me, especially as someone who leads our organization, that was on me to not look ahead and realize that it was an unsustainable model, because we were carrying a lot of weight for all of our clients whose studios were struggling. I mean, we were holding their weight, plus holding the weight of how do we rebuild our own company. That I would say, if I look back and say, where did I fail? What did I learn from it? It has changed who I am as a leader. It has changed how our team works, literally down to our work structure, how many clients they're expected to take, everything. It was a very humbling experience. Did it wind up being for the best? Totally. But did it wind up being something that I would never want to go through again if given the opportunity? Also totally.
So, what did you have to change? I think the reason somebody survived COVID was they completely changed the way they worked. What did you change? What were those changes you made? So,
going back to the basics, we had planned on changing the way our product stack, essentially, the products that we literally sold. So we have a mastermind that has hundreds of members in it from all over the world. And this was something that we hadn't been doing. We'd kind of been doing, hey, we'll work with you for a year here, we'll work with you for a year there, we'll work with you for 6-month periods. And we took a page from our own book and said recurring revenue is going to be key. And we'd planned on launching that in the spring of 2020, and of course said no. So we launched it in 2021. And it's been unbelievable to watch, how radical that growth has been, because we get to serve people for years on end. And that's really where we're in our sweet spot. And they are too, because it's not just us serving them, they're part of a greater community.
Right.
So that's probably the biggest shift. I will say the scariest part of it is we literally said we're stopping all revenue for a brief period of time, or 90% of it, and told everyone these products, which had made us tens of millions of dollars, these are no more. And there is a moment where you have to pause and be like, they worked. do I really stop the things that were working okay? And the answer is yes. Sometimes you have to.
So, I mean, one thing that comes out of this is, as a single boutique owner, if I were to get time of you, say example, I came to you, I have one single boutique studio, and I want to come to you and I want to ask, soundboard with you to pick your brains and understand what should I be doing. What do you do for them? What do you do for individual studios that makes them successful?
Lord. I mean, it's everything. So it starts with the model. We talked about this earlier. I mean, I've got studios that are no longer studios and have 8-figure a year teacher training programs. We look and say, where are you going to shine and what does your model look like? We have some people that are up to...
Do you kind of look at them?
We rip apart models like it's nobody's business. And we spend a lot of time in the numbers. So when we are doing this, we're looking at projections, we're looking at key KPIs that we're going through. We want to go through everything and say, do we have a model that's correct? And that's at the foundation of everything. If you have the wrong model, nothing else we can do. Then we get into the sales process. Of course, we do pricing as part of the model. We have 2 members of our team that just specialize in pricing. They really have behavioral economics backgrounds. That is where they're focused. We nailed that down. We've priced thousands of studios at this point. We know what that looks like. Sales process. And then after sales, we dive into marketing. To be honest with you, most studios have enough leads. Most people come to us and say, we want you to soundboard our marketing. And our reality is that we want to get everything else, all of our ducks in the row, so that when you market, you can actually handle it. It's amazing how many people will say, I'd love 500 leads in a month, and then we'll deliver that.
And they can't deliver on the sales.
And they're crying.
They're
They're asking us to
know.
turn it off. I mean, I'm like, I've literally had gotten the tears. You've got to turn it off. This is horrible. And I'm like, okay. So I think, I love, though, for me personally, members of our team especially, we've got attorneys, we've got accountants, we've got people who are financial planners, we've got people who are ops experts and digital media buyers. We've got all of those people on our team. For me personally, I'm most excited to look at where is your studio going to go in the long term. Is it going to be in an individual studio that's going to go deep? Is it going to be in a major brand? We've taken a lot of brands, both brick and mortar and digitally, to well into the 8 figures and leading towards 9 figures.
Which is your biggest, if I were to ask you a success story, you would, who's your testimonial kind of a thing, that these are the 2-3 brands you work with, you're super proud of.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll give you 2.
Mm-hmm.
The very first thing I can say is my biggest, the people that I look at and I go, oh my God, this was amazing. It's oftentimes like, hey, this is the small person. And so we have a studio owner who's Canadian. She's brilliant. She's gone from like a 10,000 Canadian dollar a year studio to a 7-figure Canadian a year studio. But here's what I love the most is she just took 4 months off and went to Portugal. 4 months off. Now, she's built a business, not a job. She is something that is
not
secondary to that. Not self-employed. And so when I look and say, okay, hey, what really matters to us? That matters, that she's able to go and she has freedom, like actual legit freedom financially and in her time. In terms of like biggest success stories, I mean, we've been lucky to work with some really wonderful groups that have 20, 30, 40 locations and run marketing programs and develop them. It's like my sweet spot. I love making marketing programs. I love the creative side of it, and driven in millions of dollars, in a short period of time. And so, those are things that from the numbers sound really sexy, and people are like, that's a big success story. It is, but there's nothing better than realizing somebody got their life back. Yeah.
I think the only thing people want to own is their time, and I think if you can help people have their own time by building a model which is sustainable, which you spoke about earlier, I think that's something every businessman is looking for. But most people end up doing, everything in the business, and the business is so dependent on them. And if it's so dependent on them, in fact, I was speaking with Andy before this, and Andy Pickles, and he said that, if you can't let your business run on its own, and it cannot run it on its own, you will never get an exit. It's not a business at all.
Yeah,
it's a
personal brand or a variation of it. I mean, it's interesting. So what I saw in our own studios when we got towards the end of this, and so let's just say I dropped down to about a 20-hour work week, probably, 4 years into our businesses. I never worked a 40-hour work week. I worked 30, went down to 20. By the time I got to like 6 year in business, I was working a 5-hour work week, and we were expanding annually.
Yeah.
I mean, it was because I built the team that was around it. I think that's such a key piece of this is we had a team, we had processes, we had accountability. I also gave people the freedom to actually do it. I mean, I think that's something that, oftentimes we are our own bottlenecks.
Yeah. Most people, I always say this, it's something which is very close to me. You don't get a dog and bark yourself. So I think a lot of people end up doing that they kind of have a team, and then they just don't let the team work as well, and they want to do everything on their own, micromanage. Not sometimes because they want to do it, sometimes because they just don't know how to hire and train people.
Yeah.
So I think the process is very important.
And I think the process is massive. I mean, onboarding in general in our industry is terrible.
Horrible.
I mean, it is a crisis, and we oftentimes then blame the
get
team
the guy,
members.
Throw them in the deep end of the thing, and say, you know what, go for it.
If you've had somebody fail in a position multiple times, so if you're hiring a manager, you're hiring a lead trainer, and they're failing over and over and over again, once you're on your second or third person, it's not them, it's you.
Yeah.
Like, look, I've done it. So I know, I learned the onboarding process the hard way because ours was terrible initially. I mean, I was just starting out. I was a kid. I was in my 20s and, had no idea what I was doing. I think this really, we get a chance to bring someone in, and so many people come to us in this industry with a deep passion. They love this industry. They love to work out. They love what it does. We get a chance to allow them to have a profession.
Yeah.
That's unique on
Yeah.
where we go.
Yeah.
It really is.
Brilliant. On this note, thank you so much. I really appreciate your being here today and taking out time. A lot I learned from you, and I think we'll have a lot of boutiques who will start talking to you and wanting to ask you how you've done this, because it's absolutely commendable what you've done in these many years. It's just fantabulous.
No, it was lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.